Welcome back to The Explainer. You know, we hear legendary stories all the time, but today we're doing something different. We are stripping away all the rumors, all the lore, and we're looking at just one thing: hard, empirical data. We're actually reopening a forensic cold case centered around a physical artifact tied to one of the most famous events in history, the September 1961 encounter of Betty and Barney Hill. We are not here to debate the story. We're here to analyze actual chemical breakdowns, X-ray fluorescence, and DNA extraction data from a dress that was literally locked away for decades. Let's get right into it.
First, you really have to hear the sensory detail Betty Hill used to describe the central artifact of our explainer. It was a brand new, unwashed blue dress she wore on the night of the incident. Now, when she got home, she folded it up and put it in the bottom of her closet. But days later, she pulls it out and finds it completely covered in this strange pink powder. She hangs it outside in the sun, and the powder blows away. But it leaves behind this heavy magenta stain. And even more curious, Betty reported feeling incredibly clammy and dirty right after the event. Keep that physical, damp sensation in mind because it is absolutely vital to the forensic data we're going to look at in a minute.
Okay, so to understand why this dress is such a big deal, we need to do a super quick rewind and walk through the timeline of September 19, 1961. Betty and Barney are driving south on US Route 3 in New Hampshire. It's about 10:15 p.m. They spot what looks like an erratic star pacing them, which eventually descends into a hovering craft. Barney actually stops the car, right? He observes human-like figures through the craft's windows before they flee. Then, they hear this irregular beeping sound, feel a tingling sensation, and get really drowsy. By the time they hear a second series of beeps, the craft is completely gone, and they had experienced 2 whole hours of missing time. That missing time is the black box we're investigating today through the physical evidence left on Betty's dress.
That night took an immediate physical toll, and the dress is literally the proof. This isn't just a stained piece of clothing, it's a damaged one. If you look closely at the inside lining on the right side, it's completely torn. I mean, all the way from the waist down to the hem. Plus the top of the zipper is ripped. This kind of physical stress aligns perfectly with Betty's account that she put up a massive struggle, kicking and fighting as she was forcefully taken across the threshold of the craft.
But here is where we find our most vital piece of forensic evidence. There is extensive discoloration completely permeating the underarm area of the right sleeve. Betty remembered that 2 beings flanked her, forcefully gripping her under her armpits to escort her. Well, the heaviest concentration of this mysterious pink and magenta discoloration occurs exactly where those physical contact points would have been. So, this underarm area right here, this is our primary target for the forensic data. Crazy enough, for 40 years, the stress just hung in a closet, uncovered, unwashed, and totally unanalyzed. Finally, in 2003, analytical scientist P.A. Buttinger acquired swaths of the fabric to run a rigorous, objective chemical analysis. They used Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, or FTIR, which is essentially a high-tech machine that takes a molecular fingerprint of a material. They paired that with microscopic examination. We are going to look strictly at what those instruments found. Let's start with the big picture, the macroscopic differences. Buttinger compared clean swaths of the dress to the damaged magenta areas. Now, the original dress is a knitted cellulose acetate. The clean control swath had this tight fiber structure, a violet color, and very few particulates. But the stained swaths? They were entirely altered. The color had shifted to magenta, and the very knit of the fabric was disturbed. It was looser, less ordered, with duller fiber bundles, and there were a massive amount of microscopic particulates just caught in the weave. The fabric itself was physically and chemically changed.
And the FTIR analysis? It revealed a really bizarre chemical fingerprint. When taking that molecular snapshot of the exterior stains, the instrument obviously identified the baseline cellulose acetate of the dress. But it also detected a strange biological coating. The stains were actually composed of a biologically derived material containing both lower molecular weight water-soluble proteins and insoluble higher molecular weight proteins. And mixed into this entire protein matrix was a natural ester-type oil. Because this coating was predominantly on the exterior of the dress, it proved it came from an external source and soaked inward.
Now you might be wondering, couldn't this just be normal bodily fluids? Well, what's just as important as what they found is what this biological coating wasn't. The scientific data allowed Buttinger to definitively rule out natural substances originating from Betty. Since the material came from an external source and soaked in, it wasn't her own perspiration. Plus, the analysis showed a complete absence of uric acid, which entirely eliminates urine. Vomit was ruled out too, mainly due to the location of the stains, mostly on the back and underarms rather than the front, and the complete lack of carbohydrates in the chemical signature. Simply put, this was a biological, oily, protein-based substance from something or someone else.
Okay, but science didn't just stop in 2003, right? Let's fast forward to 2020. Television producer and former FBI Special Agent Ben Hansen, along with Betty's niece and estate trustee Kathleen Martin, brought the dress to the University of New Hampshire's Special Collections Library. And they asked a really brilliant question. What happens when a 60-year-old dress meets the high-tech, highly sensitive scientific instruments of 2020?
To answer that, they relied on some incredibly meticulous lab protocols. Hansen actually noticed specific stains on the front waistband lining of the dress that hadn't penetrated the outer fabric at all. Thinking it might be blood from the struggle, they sent samples to Linman for DNA analysis. First up, the lab ran a Blue Star hemoglobin test to check for blood. That test came back definitively negative. But they didn't stop there. Using a highly advanced Fusion Human Specimen Direct PCR kit, which is specifically designed to procure DNA from older, minimal samples, they amplified whatever genetic material was trapped in that lining. The result of that PCR amplification was crystal clear. The DNA extracted from that specific isolated lining stain was a 100% match to Betty Hill's own DNA. Even though it wasn't blood, the highly sensitive test confirmed the presence of her own bodily fluids, like sweat, in that one localized spot. This is a big deal because it proved that modern extraction techniques absolutely still worked on this 1961 artifact. It set a completely reliable baseline for the next phase of testing.
All right, now we reach the climax of the scientific data. After the DNA testing, samples of the exterior fabric were sent to the chemistry department at the University of Pittsburgh in Bradford, Pennsylvania. A tenured chemistry professor with 35 years of experience and his colleague with 30 years of experience supervised X-ray fluorescence or XRF scans on 3 separate dress samples. And I have to emphasize, this was a totally blind study. The student running the bench-scale XRF instrument was told absolutely nothing about the origin of the fabric until the scans were completely finished.
So what did they find? Well, the XRF instrument detects heavier elements, and the cocktail it found on this dress is honestly just staggering. The waistline had titanium, manganese, and barium. A skirt sample added gallium, germanium, and lanthanum to the mix. But that third sample, the one taken from the heavily stained right underarm, it yielded iron, selenium, tellurium, and rhodium. The chemistry professors were absolutely astounded. This is not a profile you find on a normal piece of everyday clothing. Not even close. To really understand why the chemists were so shocked, we need to look at what these elements actually are. Let's take tellurium, found right there in the underarm stain. Tellurium is an incredibly rare element. To put it in perspective, in the Earth's upper crust, it averages only 3 parts per billion. You typically only find it associated with highly specialized gold deposits, or far more prevalently, out in space. Finding this embedded in a piece of civilian clothing from 1961 is a massive, massive chemical anomaly. And then there's rhodium. The sheer statistical improbability of its presence cannot be overstated. Rhodium is literally the rarest element and the most valuable precious metal on the entire planet. It makes up just 0.0002 parts per million of the Earth's crust. It's incredibly resistant to corrosion and heat. As the chemistry professor noted in his report, rhodium would never be expected in clothing. Finding both tellurium and rhodium on that specific right sleeve defies any conventional explanation.
So how in the world do we synthesize all this disparate data? P.A. Budinger, the analytical scientist from the 2003 study, put forward a biological transfer hypothesis. Basically, the data suggests a damp, acidic protein and oil substance was transferred to the dress exterior during a physical struggle. Because Betty folded the dress and put it in a dark closet while it was still moist, that weird biological substance essentially acted as a nutrient base. Over several days, a natural biological growth, like a bacteria or mold, grew on it. When it finally dried out, it left behind the pink powdery residue and the permanent magenta chemical stains on the cellulose acetate fiber.
Think about the profound implication of that hypothesis for a second. During her encounter, Betty actually asked for a book as proof of her experience, but it was taken away from her right before she left. Looking at the strange oils, the complex proteins, and the utterly alien elemental profile left on the fabric, Budinger wrote something pretty haunting. She said, perhaps they may have left her something far better than a book, i.e. the very essence of themselves on the dress. We've looked at the torn lining from a documented physical struggle. We've examined the FTIR scans showing completely foreign proteins and oils. We've seen the blind XRF data revealing mind-blowing elements like rhodium and tellurium on a 1961 garment. The empirical data is right there, staring us in the face. So taking all this highly structured forensic evidence into account, what do you think this evidence points to? I'm going to leave that for you to decide. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the data.